Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. I'm Heather Burnt Santee, and I've got Richard Cohen today,
Hi, everyone.
and that's him. And together, Richard and I are going to talk to author Michelle Salcedo, who has written a book that I just read. Actually, I speed read it at the end of the year because I wanted to be able to keep it in consideration for the end of the year top 5 reads countdown that I do on my Facebook page. And it was wonderful and I loved it. So anyway, we're here to talk about it. And the book is called Uncover the Roots of Challenging Behavior, Create Responsive Environments Where Young Children Thrive. So Michelle, will you tell folks about yourself a little bit and then we'll jump in?
Sure. Hi, Heather and Richard. So happy to be here with you and everybody else in this podcast world. As Heather said, my name is Michelle Salcedo, and I have been in early childhood for many, many years as a teacher, as a director, as a content curriculum developer. Have worked in leadership of many or of 2 of the top early childhood programs in the country. Now I work for a wonderful company called Quality Assist, creating really interactive and exciting e-learning for teachers across the world. And also have 2 children who are grown and a grandchild, and I'm just excited to be here with the 2 of you.
I want a grandchild. That's no fair. All right. So Richard, you have something you wanted to get in before we move forward.
Oh, you mean my funny story?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
No, I'm going to save that for the very end.
Oh, for the end. Okay.
Yes. What I would like
so
to
Michelle
say
can be
before we
on
start-
pins and needles through the whole thing.
Exactly. I like to keep
Great.
Michelle on her toes.
Mm-hmm.
Michelle and I have known each other since 2004. And so I've been keeping her on her toes for 17 years. And just a quick confession before we get into the discussion about this book. I haven't actually read it past the dedication page.
Oh my God. Are you on the dedication page?
Michelle?
I think you are, aren't you? Aren't you at
I seem
He's
to
everywhere.
remember
He might
that
as
my
well be.
name may have been mentioned on the
that
dedication.
there? Okay, yeah. I was really concerned for a minute. Like, did I bow?
He's calling you out in this
bow
podcast.
to the pressure that I knew Richard was going to put on me to put him somewhere in there. So
Yes,
I did.
my
bow.
name was in bold and italics.
Wow, very nice.
And I'm lying. I
Just
did
like-
read the whole book. It's an amazing book.
Just like you, Richard, you're bold in italics.
Aw, thanks.
You're welcome.
All right, back to me.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so here's our quote to start our conversation. The image of a gardener tending to a plant provides us with a different lens through which we can examine children's challenging behaviors. I'm not a gardener, but I know many people, including my own children, who are. When faced with a plant that is not thriving, the dedicated gardener will quite literally leave no stone unturned in the quest to discover why. So first of all, I love the analogy, the framing children's behavior, helping children with their behavior next to helping a plant grow. And I think we've seen, a lot of us probably have seen, and you use it here too. There's a quote, when the flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower. But to really hone it in on this area of helping children with behaviors, I think is so helpful. So I want to let you first just talk a little bit about that as a starting point.
Sure. It really, for me, as I was thinking about, I'm going to back up for a second. So when I first started talking about this book and thinking about these ideas, it used to be called Teacher as Detective, because it was about looking at clues and thinking about that kind of idea. And it just didn't sort of gel for me as I was thinking through things. And part of it might have been, the outlines of bodies on the ground that detectives look at didn't feel right for early childhood.
It would be a very different cover.
It would be a very different cover, very different discussions, especially if somebody didn't read past the dedications, they might not make great decisions for children. But I was thinking about, and then I started thinking about these ideas and how that quote informed a lot of what I had done as teachers, and thinking about this idea that it's not up to us to fix children. that's not what we're talking about when we talk about developmentally appropriate practice, or we talk about building classrooms. And I started thinking about my children and how they talk about their gardens and how they are passionate about, it's never about this, there's something wrong with this plant. It's about, what do I need to do to help this plant thrive, to help this plant be successful? And it just, everything fell in place when I started thinking about that analogy. And so it really was about this idea that as teachers, it's up to us to not say, what is wrong with this child? How do I need to fix this child? But instead, what do I need to do to help this child be successful?
Mm-hmm.
What is this behavior telling me? And what can I do in my environments, in my activities, in my interactions to support this child?
And sometimes it's, what do I need to learn? So I'm not a gardener, but I dabbled in like container gardening on a patio for a couple of summers, mostly because I wanted to grow cucumbers and make pickles using my grandma's recipe, which I did, but I've moved on from. Anyway, that's what I found myself doing when I didn't know what was working. I thought, well, I have to learn something to be able to work through this problem that I've got. And I think that is a key part of this analogy too for me. But the idea that leave no stone unturned in the quest to discover why was powerful for me. And so early in the book, that really hit me because, and I don't want to sound like I'm making broad generalizations or anything, but every program I've worked in ever in 30 years has had people who have given up on a child or a couple of children because their behavior is so hard to understand or figure out. And so this idea of doing everything we can to help the plant thrive, I think is a powerful lens.
Yeah, and what a message that is to children when we say to them, "Hey, you're 3 years old, but I've given up on you."
Yeah,
and you are.
They may not even
unfixable.
be aware themselves. I mean, but that's the idea. You know, they're in, like when I was a director, they'd be in my office saying, you know, I've tried everything. Nope, there's no reasons. I've looked for reasons. You know, this just isn't working. And so they're not saying to themselves even, well, I've given up on this one, but I see it happening, and it's hard on both sides.
Sure.
Well,
And
I
then
think one of the clues to giving up, when you know a teacher has given up, is when they start labeling children. They may not realize or even think they're you know,
or
most
have
of them are
malicious
lovely,
intent.
wonderful people, and they would never say, "Oh, I'm giving up on this child," but they would say, "This is one of my bad kids." And that's the first clue in your own self-reflection that you've basically given up on this child.
And I also think a really interesting clue that I've seen before in a lot of classrooms is, so you get rid of that child, you know, the problem child, you kick them out. And now suddenly another child steps up and is the new bad child. And, you know, for those of you in podcast world, please know I did quotations around bad child.
Yeah. We keep talking about a sound effect for air quotes, and I haven't quite worked it out yet, but yeah.
And so that's also a clue too, is that there's always another child who steps into that role. That should tell you something about your environment. And you're absolutely right, Heather, about this idea of learning. And I had looked at that also as community, right? That gardeners talk to each other at farmers markets. They go and they're like, "Hey, what do you think about this?" Or "I grew this, and I know you should see this," right? They talk to each other, they celebrate with each other. And as early childhood professionals, we need to do that as well, that lifelong learning and learn from each other and talk to each other and, you know, find ways to connect with other people about, like, man, this child seems to be struggling in my classroom. What do you got for him? What do you think? Can you come in and watch? That kind of thing, because it's sometimes hard to see because it is exhausting. You know, children that are communicating through challenging behaviors, it is difficult when you're in that classroom. And so to be able to reach out for support and help is a big step. That's really important.
Yeah. The other thing that I appreciate about there's a lot of things I appreciate about this book, but it's very practical. So there's there's ideas like we've been talking about so far, but then there's also, so I'm thinking about, and I'm looking at it, actually the chapter where you are, there's a section where you talk about the appropriateness of expectations. And then you go through some examples of like circle time and things that are really happening that are probably the real problem that's in that teacher's mind when they're hearing us speak or reading this book. So so I appreciate that. And I wanted to ask you about this expectations idea specifically to talk about, because in the last couple of semesters, I've taught a behavior guidance class at the college here. And I talk about appropriate expectations, and then in their work that's coming back, they talk about lower expectations and lowering their expectations. And so
Interesting.
I'd like to, if you would, ask you, and I know Richard will have some thoughts here too, about how to differentiate. We're not talking about lowering expectations, which is a different kind of giving up, I think, but having appropriate expectations. So can I turn that over to you for a bit now?
Yeah, I want to start with an example or something that happened when I was in a center, and I was there to do some training that night. It was a center that I was part of the education team for, and I was sitting in the director's office, and we were just talking about things. And it was an open concept center, so I could hear the pre-K classroom that was next door to the director's office, and you could hear the teacher was trying to do circle time. And she was so frustrated. And, she was you could hear her trying to get all the kids over there and then fussing at children and trying to get them all to sit down and, all of that stuff that comes with circle time. And at some point she said, "Oh, you guys, like, this is so hard. You make me want to be at home and it's only 10 o'clock in the morning." And a little boy said, "Me too." And I'm like, yeah. And so that night when I was at this training with this teacher, and we just talked about, like, tell me your struggles. Tell me what was happening there. And she said, "It's just so hard to get all the children to come to circle time." And I said, "You don't need to do that." And the look of relief and shock on her face and so that's what we're talking about when we talk about appropriate expectations. It doesn't mean that we're lowering expectations. It means that we know that some children, they're developmentally ready to be at a circle time. Some children, they may be developmentally ready and have no interest, and they may be not developmentally ready for that part of the day yet, and that's okay. It's not your job as a teacher to get everybody to circle time. Your job as a teacher is to have a fun, engaging circle time. The children who are there will be there, and those who aren't, that's okay. You have other things around the classroom that they can engage with. And I think about Bev Boss when we were at her center. And she used to talk about the way she started story time each day was she would just pick up a book and walk through the center and sing some song about starting story time. And the children who wanted to be there came to story time. And she said, one day I got to my story chair and I sat down and nobody was there. Nobody was interested in story time. And she thought to herself, I must be a pretty good teacher because I've got such exciting things going around in the center right now, and children are so engaged. They're not at story time, and that's okay. And she didn't take that as a judgment of herself and that I failed as a teacher. Instead, it was like, hey, this is the expectation for today, and it's fine. No. You, Richard, what would you like to say about that?
I was just pausing for Richard, yeah, because
and that's what I was too.
Yeah.
Wow, my ego is loving this podcast.
Yeah, it's about resting our voices. It's not really about hearing you.
Okay,
but go ahead.
Well, let me mansplain what Michelle just
Would
said.
you? Thank you.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, you're welcome. No, I mean, obviously, I agree with everything that Michelle just said and think that it was totally brilliant and spot on. And I would add, when we talk about expectations, as you often hear me say on this podcast, our attrition rate is so high in this field, 43% or higher attrition rate, probably more during this pandemic. And so we constantly have this influx of or less educated folks working with young children. And so in order to make sure your expectations are appropriate, the first thing you have to do is have a basic understanding of child development and developmental milestones. So right there out of the gate, you understand not to expect toddlers to share, which doesn't mean your job is to totally consistently encourage them to share, but you ignore it when they don't, because you don't expect them to be able to do it because you understand child development. And then that sort of takes us to Lev Vygotsky and scaffolding and how we have to individualize not just our curriculum, but our guidance. This child, I can expect to do this. This child, I can expect to do that. And so I'm going to give them each the appropriate challenge so that they can meet their individualized expectation and feel themselves as successful. And the other thing that I'm reminded of, just from something I posted on my Zen page the other day, is that there's a lot of people out there whose expectation is obedience. And if that's your expectation as an early childhood professional, you're in for a really stressful time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you're right. The developmentally inappropriate expectations is a huge part of that attrition, because it's really hard. And I could see that on that teacher's face.
Right.
She was not a bad teacher. She was not she just didn't understand yet that she thought her job was to get these children to sit in a circle at crisscross applesauce,
Right.
or her job was to get them to obey, or her job was to get them to share, or whatever. And if you feel like that's your job and you're consistently failing at it because it's not an appropriate expectation, you're going to walk away. And that's a sad, that teacher was exhausted, and you could see that. And so I think, when we talk about appropriate expectations, the wonderful thing is it not only is best for children, it's best for teachers.
Right.
It really supports teachers in creating classrooms that are more fun and joyful. And I'm all about joy.
For everybody, yeah. For the
For
adults and the
everybody.
children, yeah.
Right. And so, inappropriate expectations are equally stressful on teachers as they are on children.
Yeah. So I want to sort of jump off of that to talk about, because we're talking, as you are in the book, about creating conditions for children to thrive. We talk a lot about setting up things to prevent misbehavior. And it's sort of become just something we say as we're checking off a list of, okay, I've got this problem. I've looked at my environment.
I've got two cars.
Things. Right. Yeah. I've got two of everything.
Yeah.
But you talk too about making sure that the curriculum that we're offering is part of that environment that we set up in which they can thrive. And you use a HOMES acronym to sort of examine curricular decisions. And so I guess, will you talk about that a little bit now?
So I need to, this is just going to make his ego inflate, that I'm not even sure it's going to fit in that little square there.
Right.
But a nod to Richard, that when I worked with him, one of the things that he expanded was my idea of curriculum, from just activities to this idea that it's everything that impacts on a child's experience in the classroom. And so curriculum is activities, environments, and interactions, and curriculum, and assessment, and like everything there. And so that also shapes how I look at how we design classrooms. And when I talk about designing environments, it's about all of that. But the HOMES acronym, so, and I'm from Detroit. And so HOMES is also the way you identify the 5 Great Lakes, in case you ever need that for trivia: Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, Superior. You're welcome. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And so it also, when we talk about early childhood, it really is the way we measure active learning, because children are active learners, and that means that we need to be planning environments that are about active learning. And so H is for hands-on. Again, Bev Boss said, if it hasn't been in the hands, it can't be in the brain. Right? We need to have children manipulating real things as much as possible. Richard and I both have experience of an activity where it was supposed to have toddlers exploring straw. And so it was describing for the teacher, like, okay, you hold the straw, now smell the straw and tell children what it smells like. okay, now, listen to the straw as and tell children what
I
it
think
what
I've
it
used that
sounds like.
curriculum
Yeah.
um,
Toddlers.
with
toddlers,
toddlers.
right. Instead of, if you want children to learn about straw, put straw in the sensory table.
Everywhere.
Right, and be there for them to explore it and explore it with them.
Mhm.
So hands-on, open-ended, this idea of, so much of what we do with early childhood, there is a predestined outcome or a pre-expected model. And so to be able to, to just give children materials and say, show me what you can do with it, and then to be there as they explore it. Go ahead, Richard.
Oh, I was just going to point out that underneath, I'm hearing you say, Michelle, is a shift in power. In order to do that, you have to take that leap of faith that you're not in charge and you can't control their ability to learn. You have to step back and trust that they're competent. Like our old colleague Deb used to say, we trust that young children are capable, competent learners. And you have to take that leap of faith. If you think your job is to control it, to make sure they learn all those shapes and all those numbers, once again, you're setting yourself up for a really stressful time. But to let them explore the sensory bin rather than showing them the straw, you have to give control over to them. And as Piaget says, let them discover it or not.
Yeah, trust is what came to mind for me too as I was listening to you there, Michelle. It all comes down to whether we think a child is a competent learner or whether we think a child is a blank slate or an empty pitcher.
Absolutely.
And I think, and certainly that ties to helping with challenging behaviors too. If we feel like they are out to get away with stuff versus they are still learning some stuff, then that really impacts things. But
or if you don't know that 3-year-olds are still developing distinctions between fantasy and reality, you'll meet so many lovely people again who don't have that knowledge and will say, well, he's lying.
Yeah.
Well, no, actually, that's a misinterpretation of that behavior. You're missing information on child development to really understand what you just saw happen.
And little snippets, I think about things that have changed the way I look at things. And Dan Gartrell's idea of mistaken behaviors. It was like, wow, it's not that this child pushed another child to get that truck. It's like they wanted the truck. This was a mistaken way to meet that ends. And it's up to us in the same way that we, as teachers, we're dedicated to teaching letters and shapes and all this. We have to teach behaviors and we have to teach those appropriate ways. And so, when I think about power, I think about, a ballroom dancing couple who, yes, there's somebody that leads, but when you see really good couples dancing, you don't know that. They're in sync and they're trading off and they're communicating. And I think about that as classrooms as well, where there's a dance and, yes, a teacher put that straw out because they noticed that children were interested in this and thought it would be a good, exciting, interesting thing. And yes, that teacher has some previous knowledge of straw, but when they're in there and they're with those toddlers don't know that, right? Like those toddlers are so excited because their straw appeared. And my teacher's right next to me and they're discovering it with me. And this is so cool. And so when you look at a classroom like that, sometimes you don't know who's leading because it's that back and forth and it's that communication. And you're right, that's trust in a partner in the learning, and children are partners in learning. And so I think that's a helpful thing for teachers to think about. Is you're right, it's absolutely a shift in power and giving up some of the power, but trusting that child's going to be your partner in that.
So you're just doing such a good job, Michelle, of leading me from one thing I wanted to talk about to the next. It's just, you're flowing right through the book.
Do you want me to finish the homes?
Yeah. Oh, yes.
So, because right now we're stopped at Ho.
Oh,
and I just don't want to leave the people hanging like that.
Right. Let's get going.
What?
What was O?
Open-ended.
Oh, okay.
M is for meaningful. tying it into children's experiences.
Mhm.
E is for engaging in the same way, you know, that we want children's hands on, we want their brains on. And
Mhm.
so it's about, you know, not always asking questions we already know the answer to, right? But giving children opportunities to think. And then the S is for sensory oriented, you know, giving children opportunities to delight their senses, and to give them interesting things in the classroom to engage their senses. So that
Yeah.
that brings us from hoe to homes.
From hoe to homes, and
Yeah.
and you give specific examples in here for different times of the day, different parts of a schedule. So I'm just throwing that in to sell some books for you because
Oh,
I
thank
think
you. Thank you.
it's really helpful and could be really helpful to folks who are sort of either struggling with this themselves or teaching or training others who are. But you also then talk about relationships as part of this, as part of the conditions that are needed for children to thrive. And you talk about the rights of children, which is sort of something that's original for me in terms of what I've read about relationship building and its importance. Of course, we're all talking about that now, especially during COVID. We're really talking about relationships with children a lot, but you talk about their rights. And I love that framing of how many times have I used the word framing in this podcast? We'll get a contest going. But that framing of humanity. So it's not, and like Richard talked about with power, it's not the teacher and the child's down here. The child has rights too. The child is fully human, and you really do a good job here of talking about that. So and I know you wrote the book a long time ago, so if you need me to go through any of these rights you've listed, I can do that. But will you talk about why it's important that children have rights? What?
Let me just jump in. For anyone out there, like especially like college teachers who have requirements, like you can't use a book that's older than so many years.
It's a couple years, right?
What year was your book published, Michelle?
I think 2018.
Yeah.
Okay.
So for remembering what's on page 74, that's a long time ago. Yeah.
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 Well, and you're right. I don't remember all of them, but one of the ones that I think that when I talk to teachers about, it's about the right to receive attention.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an important one to reframe that, because you hear teachers a lot of times, or parents a lot of times, say, oh, he just wants attention.
Mm-hmm.
And the other, no, he needs attention. He has the right to receive attention. And it's really hard when you're in a classroom with 18 other children, all, you know, for 8 to 10 hours a day, 4 to 5 days a week, to have that need met appropriately. And sometimes those needs ebb and flow. And so when we reframe that of, okay, this child doesn't just want attention. It's about, he needs it, he has the right to it, and it's up to me to meet that right, to help put those conditions in place where he receives the attention that he has the right to. And it just sort of looks at this idea of, and taking that Bill of Rights and looking at things that say, you know, oh, well, they have the right to stimulation. We need to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so it just sort of, yeah, it brings that humanity, you know, because yes, all of us need attention. That's, you know, as human beings, it's a need. And, you know, we all have a need to have some power.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that what we're kind of seeing now in a time of pandemic is some human beings reacting to not having power.
Mm-hmm.
And that's their way of saying, hey, I need power in my life. Well, children are human beings. And so they also need power. And so we need to find ways, appropriate ways, right? We're not going to give children power to decide that they're going to pull a fire alarm or things like that.
Yeah.
But finding appropriate ways to help those rights and needs be met.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of times, or sometimes challenging behaviors are telling us that this need inside me is not being met. And so as a teacher, I need to figure that out.
Mm-hmm.
And do some work around that.
Mm-hmm. I just had a thought and it's gone, but which is also a theme. And the last of the rights that you list here is the right to be a child and an individual. which is also very important, because so many times issues around the idea of behavior problems, challenging behavior, however you want to say it, are because we can't get this individual to be part of the group effort. And that's what identifies a behavior as being right or wrong a lot of times.
Sure.
And they have that right and need, just like we do, to be seen as an individual with individual needs. Another thing I think we give a lot of lip service to, but we can't always find good ways to practice
Sure.
it.
Well, and you think, and I saw a quote once about how, we want children to color inside the lines as children, but as adults, we want them to, change the world.
Yeah.
Well, you can't do that. Like
Yeah.
you have to let them, let's throw away the lines. Let's embrace the weird and the strange, because those are wonderful children and they're wonderful adults.
Mm-hmm.
And, so I think that's again, helping teachers understand and know it's not your job to make everybody fit in the same box.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay.
Right. And that idea that it's okay is so key here. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad you've said that a few times, that teachers have permission
Mm-hmm.
to change and to give up some of those things that are so stressful. I mean, I know a lot of times there's administration and other issues, but
there's a lot of pressure.
There's pressure, but if we really, I guess there's an element of sort of internal permission that I think can be given even in those situations.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to point out there's a bit of bias here for listeners and viewers, because these two women are two of the weirdest, strangest people I have had the pleasure of knowing across my entire life. They're very pro weird and strange.
I'd argue if I could.
Yeah.
That is true. Pro weird. I do count myself in the pro weird.
You're the
column
child for weird.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. I do think that normal and should are two of the most dangerous words in the English language.
Yeah.
Well, they're like obedient. And, when you were talking a moment ago about letting children be individuals, that is anathema. Is that the word I want to say?
It is a word
that goes against the culture of standardization that children are born into and teachers find themselves working in. Right. One of the reasons teachers get frustrated, among many, is that the children aren't meeting those standards.
Mm-hmm.
Well, right. That's because they're individuals.
Yeah.
And if your expectation is that they should be meeting these standards, again, you are setting yourself up for a really stressful professional life.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm reading Beyond Quality in Early Childhood Education, Languages of Evaluation. 3 folks over in Europe have edited this or written this book together. Anyway, it's really challenging a lot of these sort of cultural, the myth of standardization, and that it's something we can even achieve. And so it's the whole time I'm reading it, I'm like, but how do we get there? How do we get there?
Well, and let's remember the roots of it, right? Mm-hmm. Like this educational system that's based on standardization was born at a time when we were trying to produce mass workers for mass employment. And at that time, that was a goal so that more people could survive.
That made sense.
But now we have to relook at that and go, I'm not sure standardization in 2021, with unprecedented problems that these future adults are going to be facing, is the best goal for us to have as a society.
Mm-hmm. When you think about just the way that our society has gone, and that if we continue to educate children like we did in the 19th century for the 21st century, we're really setting them up for failure.
Yeah.
And there was at our local farmers market, when that was a thing, there's a woman who apparently makes her living making special marshmallows. And I look and I'm like, wow, I bet she was a weird kindergartner. Good for you, honey. Like, I mean, that's, if you can make your living making, concierge marshmallows or whatever it was,
right.
That was a weird child. But that child was allowed to be weird. Right. Yeah. And that's absolutely wonderful, because a lot of those jobs don't exist anymore.
Mhm,
And so she had to make her own way. And if she was forced into standardization, she might be a really angry, upset adult right now.
Yeah.
And the world would not have fancy marshmallows.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I want to live in a world with
with
fancy,
fancy marshmallows.
It's the world I want to live in.
And weird children. That's
Yeah.
my world. So Richard, I think it's like just today, and by the time this comes out, it won't be on your Facebook easily to find, but I think just today you posted something about getting away from the narrative of preparing children for good jobs,
Right.
spending their whole childhood. And I think that's where we get so tied up in behavior and conformity and obedience. It's part of that narrative, right? Well, if they're not, compliant in preschool, they won't be compliant in school, and then they're not going to be compliant in their job. And it sounds miserable to me when we flip it that way.
Well, I'll try hard not to open up a giant can of worms, but I'm not very good at that.
Right.
Um,
Do what you need to do with your worms.
wow, I need to get that on a t-shirt.
I was going to say, hopefully it doesn't cut out, but that was the name of my sex tape.
That's what I say.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I think introducing you two to each other I'm realizing was a huge mistake.
Go ahead with your worms. Come on.
Oh, now I've forgotten. What were you just saying, Heather?
Good
About the
jobs.
jobs,
Good
about
jobs,
preparing
right.
children for work.
So I have to say that as I was posting that this morning, I was reflecting on my white male privilege that undergirds that statement. Because there are a lot of people of poverty, and statistically that it means Black, Indigenous, and people of color primarily, who were raised to believe that having a good job is the right goal for your child, right? Because your family has survived. And so you are parenting with the goal of how do I help my child survive in this world? Well, they need to get a good job. And so, I want to just point out about that post that you're referencing, Heather. While I believe in that,
Sure.
I also want to say that there is an underlying thread of systemic racism and systemic oppression that's in that statement. Because those people who never get past the need for a good job just propagate that for generations. And suddenly you find this group of people who aren't educated to think critically and aren't educated to dream bigger or even consider selling marshmallows at a farmer's market. They just want to survive. And the best way to be a parent to my child is to just help them survive and get a good job.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But if you never break that cycle, then there's a system in place which keeps those people from ever breaking that cycle of thinking that the greatest goal is a good job.
Right.
Well, and I think there's kind of two things that sparked in me. And one is, unfortunately, that cycle looks to educate children for jobs that are probably not going to exist for much longer.
Yeah.
And so part of that is shifting that, like, absolutely. We also want your child to have a good job. Here's some things that we are doing now so part of that is shifting that narrative a little bit, because it is a valuable goal for their child. It shouldn't be the only goal. Is perhaps we need to expand that.
And some unpacking of good job, like unpacking of what that means.
What that means.
Yeah.
And also, unfortunately, because of the way our country is, sometimes that's the only way to sell early childhood to a government, is to say this is about workforce creation and making sure that a workforce is ready. But so
I don't want to sell it to the government anymore. I'm done commodifying children for the purpose of making my point. But I get what you're saying. That was just a little overflow.
No, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Well, I'm reminded of something that Michelle taught me 17 years ago when we were creating teacher professional development content together. And I've never forgotten it, which is, we often talk about, sorry, I have an early childhood problem of my own. I have a young dog that has suddenly taken on the behavior of barking.
Uh-huh.
And I could put him in a timeout, but that's not going to work.
No, you just let him bark.
Right.
Mhm.
But anyway,
we were back to me teaching you.
Yeah, 17 years ago, she was
Yeah,
teaching
yeah.
you something.
Yes, of course, she
you're
has
welcome.
not forgotten that.
Mhm.
No.
I was making it up. You didn't teach me anything. No, I'm kidding. We used to talk about kindergarten readiness, and Michelle created a whole unit about, you okay there, Heather?
Yeah, little gag, sorry.
Life readiness. And that
Yeah.
Michelle would say that when she would talk with parents and ask them, she would make a list of what do you want for your child? And they would never say to write their letters and numbers.
Mhm.
They would tell Michelle, I want them to thrive. I want them to be in a healthy relationship. I want them to, be prosperous in their lives. And so,
I do that too.
huh?
I
Yeah,
do that too.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh my God.
But so,
Yeah.
again, some people think that a good job is where you hold the bar. But when you really look at the goal of early education through that lens that Michelle introduced me to all those years ago, you realize that you can have both.
Mhm.
You can have a job that puts food on the table, and you can also thrive as a human being.
Mhm.
And that's the goal, perhaps, of good early childhood education.
So thank you, and I've expanded that. Like I do that with early childhood professionals now. I will often start trainings with your parents, and of course, many of them are. And I say, okay, let's just imagine that you are asked to drop your child off for 8 hours a day with a group of strangers, because that's what we ask families to do every day almost. What do you want for that child? And of course, the two that always come out are love and safety.
Mm.
I mean, those are the first two. And as we go through that list, the same thing happens. Very few people list obedience. Very few people list, getting the child to sit crisscross applesauce. Those don't show up on the list. What shows up is love and safety and those kind of things. And helping, again, people realize that we're meeting families' needs
Mhm.
when we start with those things. And I was doing that activity with some teachers. And one of them, it was really interesting because we had gone on and we had started other parts of the training. And she came back like 5 minutes later and she's like, no. I don't want love from my child. I want my child to be adored.
Aw.
And I thought, what a powerful message for other teachers,
Mhm.
that when families are at work, they need to feel that somebody is adoring their child, and talk about relationships, and build in relationships with children. That idea that, for at least a minute a day, that child feels like they're the center of that teacher's universe. And how important that is.
Mhm.
And again, bringing it back to challenging behaviors, when you start with that foundation of relationships and building strong and solid and reciprocal, respectful relationships, there will be fewer challenging behaviors.
Mhm.
We'll get back to that.
I'm curious to get both of your opinions on this question or this topic. 2 days ago or 3 days ago, I posted on Zen something about obedience and how that's not the greatest goal. And there was a person who commented and said, "This is bull dookie."
Old Dookie.
Something like
I heard swearing was allowed.
Yeah,
Right.
Richard.
Bull dookie.
Obedience is very important. And now I just want to point out to the nerd listeners and viewers that we're filming this at the end of the first week of January. And so this person's comment came on Wednesday night, the day that our Capitol was
Mhm. Under siege.
Overrun. Yeah.
overrun. Yeah, I'm
Yes.
kind of resistant to the word siege, but that's a
Okay.
different conversation.
Right.
But yeah, overrun with rioters.
Uh-huh.
And her point was that if these people had been taught to be obedient when they were young, they would not have overrun the Capitol as adults. They would have respected laws and followed rules. And so that seems to be logical on the surface, right?
Mhm,
If this,
mhm.
then that. And I wonder what you two think about that. How do we disavow people of that over what is to me overly simplistic thinking?
Mhm.
I would go back to that Bill of Rights and the right to have power in your life. And that if obedience is your primary goal, then probably the other person in that relationship does not have much power. And
Mhm.
that need for power will come out. And whether that be, picking up a chair and throwing it across a classroom, or overrunning a capital, and that's again an oversimplification of a long series of power struggles and things
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
That need for power will come out. And so I agree that there are times that children need to be obedient. When they are, you've opened your door, the child runs out and is running towards the street, and the parent yells, "Stop." They need to know that there are times for obedience. But there are always opportunities to teach that.
Mhm.
And there are opportunities that will come up. And so, that balance of where does this child have some power in their lives? We all understand that, and that grows within us when we have that opportunity for power. That means we also trust the adults in our life. And so when that adult does say stop, we stop, because
Mhm.
we recognize that adult has our best interest in mind, and that it's not just about obedience, it's about
Mhm.
safety, and it's about well-being and all of that. And where I stand on that.
Yeah, I don't know that there's an easy way to have any sort of impact on that mindset because it's so ingrained. But we do have research that says that the children who, and so if I'm thinking about obedience, I'm thinking about punishment. I'm thinking about, control from top down. And we do have some research that shows that actually has the opposite effect, and probably because of the power that you're talking about, Michelle. But we also know that children learn by watching and experiencing, not by being told. So we can tell them they need to be obedient. We can do things that are unpleasant when they're not obedient, but they're learning by watching us. And what they're learning is that when I'm bigger, I can do whatever I want. When I am the one with the power, then the rules don't apply to me. If I have a good reason, if I'm doing this for a good reason, then it's okay, whatever I do. And I think that's more what I saw. And I don't want to turn this into a whole, political thing, but life is political. So that's what I saw when I was watching some of the coverage of that. Was these are people who think they have a good enough reason and finally have and feel like they have that power, and that's why they're doing this. It's not about whether they were spanked as a child or whether
I think they
I
were.
don't know, I've talked myself into a corner now, but I think there's
Really
not
well.
really an easy way. This, it comes up a lot too. Well, I was spanked as a child and that's how I learned. Or I had one teacher tell me when I was not allowing timeouts anymore in a program for school age kids, well, that was the worst thing that could happen to me as a child. I would be devastated if I was put in a timeout. I was like, well, that's not what we're going for. We're not
Right,
going for
right.
devastation and sadness. We're going for helping a child learn how to navigate this better or differently. And so I just think it's got such a stronghold, that idea of obedience, and that obedience comes from someone else inflicting power on me,
So
so
that's
that I
really
learn to be
interesting,
obedient.
Heather, because I think that you are, like you've said, you've talked yourself into a corner, but I think it makes a lot of sense where, as a child, if I see an adult who has all the power over me, then I think that as an adult, I should have all the power. And when I don't, well, then I
I've
have
got to do
every
something
right
to
to go
bring it
get it.
back.
I
Mhm.
have every right to go get all the power that's due me.
Yeah.
For being an adult, for being a white male, for being whatever it is, that really could come from that relationship and from that, early that
Mhm.
young child seeing, oh, when I get to be an adult, I get to get all this power,
Mhm.
because I don't
Yeah.
have any right now.
Yeah.
Right.
Would you?
And Oh, go
talk
ahead.
about Zen. I know I was going to say, so should we write all this up and put it on your
Yeah.
response?
Storm
please.
Richard's Zen page.
Yes,
Right.
please. No, I was going to say, oh goodness, it's left my brain. Heather and I have had conversations before, and Michelle and I have had separately over the years about Alfie Cohen,
Mhm.
and that whole way of looking at the world. And one of the things that you hear when you talk about Alfie Cohen, one of the first responses of resistance that you get, right, is people who will say, well, but I'm rewarded by my paycheck. And if I do
Mhm.
something wrong at my job, I get punished because I get fired. And so rewards and punishments work,
Mm.
right? And so to me, what's missing in there is an understanding, yet again, of child development. That yes, those things are correct in terms of adult learning theory and adult behavior management, but it's a mistake to apply them to the first 5 years of life.
Mhm. Well, and
But I also think,
oh, sorry, Michelle.
no, but I think, Richard, the whole paycheck thing, I agree totally, but it exactly illustrates his point. Because how many of us go into a job so excited about it and just
Mhm.
wanting to do the work and being part of this, and by a year in, you're like, is it Friday yet?
Mhm.
Or here comes Monday, and when is payday? So it becomes about the reward
Mhm.
instead of about what you're doing. And that's exactly what in the first 5 years of life,
Yeah.
we don't want it to be about.
Yeah.
Right. Good point.
Well, in my response to the paycheck specifically, because apparently that's comes up with Alfie Cohn, is this paycheck idea,
It
and it does.
absolutely does. Every
But
conversation.
so
yeah.
so my employer, because I need my paycheck. I'm highly motivated to get my paycheck.
Right.
My employer
Nothing
could
wrong with it.
say, I'll give this to you if you can do a backflip. But if you can't do a backflip, I'm not going to give it to you.
Mm.
Well, I'm highly motivated. I'm afraid of the consequences. I don't have the skills to do a backflip. That's not
Not with
something
that
I can
attitude,
do.
you don't.
So-
Come on.
not with this body either, but so there's lots
It's a
of
really
flaws
good
in
point.
that, and it's just um we seek to understand, we seek to make sense of the world, and we stop sometimes at the simplest explanation, and we don't go much further than that. So
Mhm.
rewards work, punishments work. That's a simple explanation. I don't have to go any further to think critically through that unless someone challenges me to do that. So that's where I'm going to land, and it's difficult to work through that with some folks.
Sure. And especially when you look at it in the short term.
Yeah.
And instead of thinking through, like, yes, it works in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean for next week? What does that mean?
Mhm.
And that's
Well,
not an effective way.
If it worked, why does it keep coming up? Like, if it worked, you'd never
Right.
have to address this behavior again because the reward worked today, but it's
That's what I say about behavior charts. If it worked, you
Yes.
wouldn't need it for more than a week.
Yes, exactly.
Right? So.
But that said, one of the things we know about poverty and how people view life when in poverty is that there tends to be a lack of future time orientation.
Sure.
And a focus on present time orientation, getting through the
Which
moment.
again is survival.
Right.
Yeah.
So if I spank my child with my hairbrush that I keep in my purse, he's going to stop doing that behavior that he got spanked for.
Mm-hmm.
And so it looks like it worked.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't really afford to think about the research about how this is going to make drug use and teenage pregnancy and dropouts and all these, and gang membership and all these things more likely to happen in 10, 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
All I know is right now it got me through the grocery store without embarrassing me.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know any other way.
Yeah.
And that's part of it too, is when we say to teachers, you can't use timeout.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know what else to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so, making sure that when we say, all right, timeout isn't appropriate, here's why, here are 7 different strategies
Mm-hmm.
that can replace timeout.
Right.
Yeah.
Which,
and be
And by
ready
the way,
for
that's
that.
exactly what you do with
I
young
was going to say, which you do in the book.
right? You don't
really,
tell them what not
really
to do.
well.
You explain to them what we call the competing behavior.
Yeah.
Or here's 5 other things you could have done to get that truck.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like to use the words effective versus ineffective,
Mm-hmm.
instead of not, or what you can do, what you can't do, what what's good or bad.
Sure.
is this effective in helping children manage their behavior and getting to what you want as a teacher, or is it less effective?
Yeah.
And let's focus on what's effective.
Yeah. And so I can't think of a specific example right now, but this is, so I want to say this too about the book. There were more than one spot. I wish I had an example now because it's going to sound weird, where I read a sentence and I was like, oh, I wish she hadn't have said it that way. And then you very skillfully take it through to what you know, what you really meant. And what I'm thinking is, so that's going to attract, that's going to sort of hook the folks who need the message. You start with that, like, and I'm not saying this is the example, but something like, well, kids just need to burn off their energy. So you start with something like that. And then by the time you're done with your discussion of that piece, you've got them to the point where this is what children need, deserve, and learn from best. But you started with the way that maybe someone who's newer to this thinking would be thinking, if that makes any sense.
Well, and let me just say, that is totally emblematic of Michelle Salcedo. If you are friends with Michelle Salcedo, here's what you learn very quickly. She's about to say something really weird that's not going to make any sense, but if you just let her finish, it's going to be brilliant in the end.
I feel like that's not exactly what I was saying.
But it's true. She'll say something that's sounds totally crazy, and you're just like, let her finish. And then by the end, your jaw's dropping, and you're like, oh my God, that makes so much sense.
Yeah.
But you have to that's because she's weird. So that starts out with this really weird thought, and she's got to work her way through to help you see her point of view.
Yeah,
And that's part of why Michelle's so brilliant.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think it's it just really is well done. And thank you for it. Thank you for the book.
Oh,
and
you're welcome.
I hope.
Can I bring this full circle back to the original quote?
Would you please? Because we're at an hour.
Okay. Oh, I'm going for an hour 20 at least.
Okay.
You don't edit this shit. I'm telling you right
I never edit. I'm too lazy for editing.
All right. Good. No, the piece, the original quote, one of the things I liked most about it, when Michelle talked about leaving no stone unturned, she never said, and you said this, but I just want to kind of reiterate it. She never said to look at the flower. She said to look at everything around it. And one of the very first trainings that Michelle and I created together all those years ago was, because this idea of timeouts is about looking at a behavior and then delivering a behavior in response to it. And one of the trainings that Michelle and I came up with years and years and years ago was this idea that you have to look beyond what's on the surface, the behavior, and you have to look at what we heard Michelle say in the beginning of this podcast, which is the developmental needs that are at the roots. All you're seeing is what's on the surface. You have to dig below the ground to understand why the flower is what it is. And so the brilliance to me of that first quote was that she wasn't even saying, look at the flower. She was saying, look at everything else that you're responsible for. The soil, the sunlight, the air, the nutrients. Don't blame it on the flower. Don't even look at the flower. And to me, that was really brilliant. So can I tell the flower?
If you do look at the flower, let's hope it's weird.
Yeah, a weird flower at least.
A weird flower.
Yeah. Oh yeah, tell your story, Richard. I forgot that
story.
Part.
Well, Michelle is like one of those flowers, that only blooms every 100 years and stinks really bad. You know those ones?
Wow.
That's Michelle. Yeah, like they're danger. They're called death flowers or something.
Yeah,
corpse
that's not
flowers,
a story.
Yeah, that's not a story.
Michelle. Yes,
Huh.
They're beautiful in their own unique way. Let's just leave it at that.
All right.
Okay.
No, when Michelle and I worked together all those years ago, we worked for a corporation that shall not be named during the years that I have often referred to as the years I sold my soul to the devil.
Yes.
But man, it was fun in hell with Michelle. We had a great time. And so it was a major corporate chain that had 1,300 centers around the world. And we were in charge of the education department. And one of the smaller tasks we had when we had time, which was rare, was to do kind of secret shopper times. And so we did a lot of traveling around the country. And on a few occasions, I just love this story, Michelle, I have to tell it.
That's great.
It's one of my favorite memories of life.
If you want me to shut off his mic at any point, Michelle, just give me like a signal.
No.
Okay.
No, this one I won't.
Okay.
I mean, were we totally unprofessional? Absolutely. But did we break any laws? No.
That
So
no was
go
quick.
to these centers around the country, and we would pretend to be a married couple who wanted to enroll our child. And
One of us was a great actor.
What's that?
One of us was a great actor.
Wait, which one? Oh,
Me. To be married to Richard?
Yeah.
yeah, that takes some acting chops. That's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah. True.
But we would have so much fun on those secret shopper trips. Our made up son we would tell them, his name is Leaf, which is spelled L-R-E-A-F. The R is silent.
To
And we would see
differentiate
that
him from the
totally
other
straight
Leafs.
face,
Right. Right.
and just watch how that poor, lovely director would try to keep a straight face and not totally judge our insanity. And then we had this little goal of trying to trip each other up
Oh my
during
God.
the secret shopper missions. And so Michelle, like one time in the middle of a discussion with the director, would say, oh, by the way, honey, I'm pregnant. And I would have to react to that. And oh my God. And then you would have to try to not crack up. And also hope that they didn't know that we were the ones from headquarters.
Sure.
But anyway,
That sounds
that
fun.
just tells you a little bit about mine and Michelle's. Yes,
I
we
wanted-
were there for the paycheck, but we had a heck of a lot of fun.
Oh, we
Yeah.
did. And my favorite moment from one of those visits was we were at a center and we were in the playground, and the teacher and this director was probably one of the better ones that we saw. She was great. And she was talking about how social emotional, because we always pushed on like, oh, but how about kindergarten readiness? And how about this? And she was talking about social emotional development. And she said something like, well, what is the value of great academics if your child can't get along with other people and is all wrapped up in themselves or something like that? And I said, oh, honey, just like you. And she cracked up about it. We like to imagine these people talking about this couple
Right.
that visited
The
over their
story that
dinner
you give
table.
someone
Yeah,
to tell. Really, that's
You
how I
wouldn't
frame
believe
my
this
whole
crazy
life.
couple that came this morning.
right. Yeah,
Oh my God, we had so much fun.
it was a great time.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Fun.
great. My whole life is a series of me thinking, is a progression of me thinking, well, I hope that gave someone a funny story to tell when they get home.
Yeah, that is my goal in life. Yep.
Yes, we have all, I think all three of us have given many people funny stories.
Good stories. All right. Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much, Michelle.
All right, wait, I have to say something more.
Oh my God.
I know, I'm sorry. And I don't have to have the last word because you women need to say something when I'm done. But this is such a rare opportunity.
You're not
that I
my
can't let it
boss.
go. There are a few people that I've met across my life. And Heather, you and I are not included in this group,
Oh,
that I
okay.
consider as some of my favorite human beings that, like, to me, are emblematic of where our evolution needs to take us as a species. They're just like great human beings. I'm too flawed. I'm not even in that category. But Michelle is absolutely at the, I don't want to say she's at the top of that list, but she's on that very short list of great, great human beings that just inspire inspire me to improve as a human being and grow. And Michelle, just in today's conversation, because Michelle and I have been friends for all these years, so we've had a lot of fun, foolish friend conversations, but we haven't had a really good professional early childhood conversation like this one in a long time. And I'm going to try not to cry, but Michelle, I'm so proud of you. I can see your growth and your mastery that you have attained since 17 years ago when we were together. And I just couldn't be more proud of you and love you more than I do right now.
Thank you, Richard. Feelings
Oh.
mutual.
Oh,
But I would
That's
also say
nice.
you set your standards a little low, because if I was at evolution of human, I wouldn't have as much facial hair.
No, that's it.
Yeah.
it's appropriate
next step of evolution,
expectations.
especially after this
Not low.
pandemic. Stop shaving your legs. Let your armpit hair grow, women.
All right.
Done.
I don't need
Like
a
I need
pandemic for
permission
that.
from-
Yeah.
Yeah. I
By
need
the way,
permission
we have
from
a
you to do that.
cameo.
Hi,
Oh,
James.
hi. Okay, so
Hello,
Richard's
how's
husband has
everybody?
joined the call.
That's my husband, James, who wanted to say hi to Michelle. And the
Hi,
mom.
James.
Well,
How are you,
okay.
Michelle?
Good. How are you
You look
doing?
fantastic.
Thank you. Thanks.
And you too, Heather. I love those glasses.
Oh, thank you.
All right, go on.
Okay. All right. Bye,
Sorry, we
James.
totally hijacked this show, Heather. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's fine.
I'm
But I'm gonna wrap it up. So
Okay.
thank you both, and thanks to everybody for listening. I hope that you liked this one. Check out the book. It's
Yes.
really, really a good read.
Uncover the
and
roots of challenging behavior from
yeah.
Free Spirit.
Let's say
Free
that name
Spirit
again.
Uncover the
Yes.
roots of challenging behavior from Free Spirit Publishing.
Yeah.
And I have a Facebook page, Teacher is Gardener. I've
That's
been
right.
the missing pony. But
Yeah. Thank
If-
you, Michelle,
if
because
you
usually I
are
try to
disciplined,
do that at the end.
class, a college class in early childhood, Michelle's book is a great textbook to use for that class.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I'm trying to figure out how to get it in on mine.
Great.
Okay, so really we're done this time.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.
right.
Thanks for